Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science Environmental Summit. We appreciate everyone coming in today. And for those of you here in the room, we are doing something unique, at least for UMCES, and that's what we call the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. And throughout today, there's going to be opportunities. There may be questions that flash up on the board. You could go to www.menti.com and put in the answers to your questions. And when you get to your phone, it'll constrain your answer, or it'll tell you how it'll display. It won't show it up there, but just trust it. And if it's a real failure, we'll stop midway, but I have a lot of confidence in you guys. I wanted to just kind of do a couple of quick little field notes. For speakers, presenters, and panelists, if you haven't already given in your PowerPoint, please do so. I think most people have. For that same group, the speakers, panelists, anyone who's going to be on stage, 10 minutes before you're due on stage, if you could go to the back, to the sound group, and get your microphone, that would be most helpful. I wanted to recognize several of the folks in the room today. I'm going to be doing this throughout the day. So if you think I forgot someone, you don't have to shout out their name. Just write me a little note, and when I come back up here later in the day, I'll be sure to recognize them. Starting off with members of Governor Hogan's cabinet, I'd like to, and I would ask everyone to please hold applause until this list is done, but I'd like to recognize Secretary Robert McCord of the Department of Planning, Special Secretary Wendy Peters of the Office of Smart Growth. I believe I saw Director Roy McGrath from the Maryland Environmental Service. We have Ann Swanson here, the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Former members of a governor's cabinet, Bob Summers, former Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment. We have a Board of Regent, Bob Rao, who's here. So that's the University System of Maryland Board of Regents. You're going to be hearing soon, and I'll do a formal introduction of Chancellor Bob Curette. We have University System of Maryland Vice Chancellors, Leonard Raley and Renetta Tull that are here this morning. We have university presidents, Chuck Wright from Salisbury University, and President Emeritus Don Bosch of UMCES that's here today. And then from our Board of Visitors, we have the Board of Visitors really help us, advise us in working with within the community of stakeholders. And they're very important advisors to us. And they include our chair, Charlie Monk, Tom Buckmaster, Peggy Derrick, Gary Epstein, Don Graff. That's who I've seen so far. Again, if I've missed anyone, please let me know. I'd like to, it's my really great honor to introduce Chancellor Bob Curette. He became the 4th Chancellor of the University System of Maryland in 2015. And the University System of Maryland is the state's public higher education system comprising of 12 institutions, of which UMCES is one of those 12, 2 regional higher education centers, and the system office. The system serves more than 175,000 students and has more than 1 million alumni living today. Its operating budget is $5.6 billion a year, and it attracts nearly $1.3 billion in external grants and contracts per year. And our faculty do a good part of that $1.3 billion. Previously, Dr. Curette served as president of the 5-campus University of Massachusetts system from 2011 to 2015, and he was the president of Towson University for 8 years prior to that. Then he was, prior to that, he was the president at San Jose State University. And he had a long history and tradition with Towson University, spanning over 25 years both as a faculty member, a dean, a vice president, and a provost during that time. He's very active in national higher education community. He serves as a vice chair of the National Association of System Heads and the chair of the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities Board of Directors, as well as serving on multiple other higher education boards. Please welcome me, please join me in welcoming Chancellor Curette.
In the introduction is longer than your speech, but and whenever I hear that, it makes me feel like it's someone who really can't hold a job very long. But great to be here. I've actually been, as Mike suggested, I've been in and out of Maryland 3 times, but the majority of my career has been here in the system. I've been in the system in 3 different roles, and it's covered 32 of the last 42 years in higher education with me. So it's been an exciting journey, and it's been great to watch the system develop. I was here when you had an old system with two systems, the 6 state universities and the 5 University of Marylands. We merged them in the late 80s, and UMCES emerged as a peer institution, the only sort of institution of its type that's among the 12. And I've watched, for the last 20 plus years, watched that system continue to mature. You know, all of you know, I like to say this is very much an academic group. You can tell an academic and research group because you start filling the room from the back and, and slowly come forward, so there's lots of empty seats up here. But, you know, I think it says a lot about the man we're here to listen to following me, Peter Goodwin, in that his investiture as president is going to occur today in a very different way than it normally does on our campuses, where, you know, we're all in academic regalia. We're going to give him or her a new medallion, perhaps a mace to fend off the faculty as necessary, and lots of speeches focused on responsibilities, vision, and the charges that are coming with the new job. And it's not what Peter wanted. He talked to me early on about this concept of foregoing what we might consider conventional trappings of an investiture and building it into this environmental summit. Today, as you know, you can see the program. You're going to be discussing a whole series of environmental topics that are relevant not only to our society, but in particular for us, to the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences, UMCES. And this is going to help as UMCES begins to develop and strengthen its own vision, its own strategic plan moving forward, which is always an important step for an incoming new president. You know, UMCES, as I mentioned earlier, is a unique institution within the system. It's the only standalone research center. I joke, it's not really a joke, I think Dawn was here too. When we merged the systems, we had 6 state universities and 5 University of Marylands. So you had 6 state university presidents and 5 University of Maryland presidents, and 6 state university provosts and 5 University of Maryland provosts. So all of a sudden, we wound up with 6 and 6, because UMCES, and actually back in those days, when this entity was part of the Biotech Institute, we actually wound up with 7 and 6. So during that merger, we went from 5 University of Marylands to 7 University of Marylands. And I always like to think it had to do with the political framework that was being developed. But, you know, from that point on, UMCES has had a very, it's, you know, relative to in a $5.6 billion budget, UMCES is a relatively small piece of that budget. And often people will say, well, why don't you merge them into one of the major campuses and leverage it? And we have looked at that, I don't know, Peter, 4 or 5 or 6 times during the tenure of these presidents. And every time we have said, not a good idea. We like having UMCES as a standalone entity, because everybody recognizes it. It gives them the credibility they need to do what they need to do, not only from a research perspective, but in our case, from a public policy perspective, both statewide and nationally. You're going to be looking at, as I mentioned earlier, a whole series of key issues. Some of the ones that are particularly important to us relate to the Bay. We always say if anyone in the state of Maryland in particular is thinking about anything related to the Bay, the very next thought we want in their mind is to talk to UMCES about what they should do about that issue. And that's a huge part of why we have kept them separate and given them the level of exposure at the state level, sitting on various sub-cabinets, et cetera, that allow us to help set that kind of state public policy that works well for all of us. Beyond the science that you're going to be doing today, which I find, I'm an organic chemist by training and did do some marine science early on in my career, which I'm very excited about, but you're also looking and having panels on inclusion and diversity. And I've been involved, you know, at the higher ed CEO level for a long time, and I've been on boards for some of the major leadership organizations in this country related to diversification of the professorate and the diversification of leadership in higher education. And despite 20 or 30 years of effort, we've made very little progress on the diversity side. And if you look at our entire system where we have thousands of faculty, you're looking at less than 10% that are African American and tenured, for example. The pipeline is getting a little better, probably about 13, 14% in the pipeline right now. But there's also an awful attrition rate. And so you make very little progress on numbers that are not where they need to be anyway. So I think that's another big part of the agenda for all of us, both from an educational, but also from a scientific perspective. You know, the entire focus of the conference is really in keeping with Peter's own thoughts about what UMCES should be doing. It's a focus that has been at the top of his agenda since we interviewed him. And it's a focus that is summarized in looking at the grand challenges that are facing the environment. And he really does believe that UMCES should be involved in those grand challenges and that it's a huge part of the future of this institution. Now, we can't do this alone. None of us can do these things alone. We need partnerships. We have to work with other agencies, other universities, the non-governmental organizations, the private sector, our own communities, et cetera. And UMCES has been very good at doing that, partly because of the way it has evolved in its own priorities, but also because of its geographic spread across the state and the 4 various laboratories which span north, south, east, and west in the state. But we're also going more and more globally, and I think Peter brings a huge portfolio to help us on the global piece. And I know that this is being streamed and that there'll be a number of people globally that are participating, and we welcome that participation and hope that it will lead to stronger relationships with the state of Maryland and particularly with UMCES in that regard. Peter didn't want today's focus to be on him, but it has to be a little bit on him because of the investiture. So I'm going to just talk for a moment about him and why we hired him. You know, as the CEO of the board, the board actually hires me, and they hire the presidents. But they tend to go with my recommendation if things are working the way they should. And then the presidents, theoretically, I like to say, report to me day to day, but it all depends on their mood. They're a pretty independent group, so it really is a lot of coordination and collaboration. And so when I'm interviewing the finalists for these positions, I am really looking not only for the best fit from, you know, a traditional credential background, but also someone by personality and style that can fit into a system environment and work in a collaborative way with 12 or 11 other partners. And I very felt that was very much what Peter could do. Now, where Peter was coming from the somewhat like Midwest, and we didn't know if there was any water out there, and so we were a little. When I first saw his resume, I'm going like, you know, I'm not sure this is the right fit. But as we looked into his background and looked at what he was doing, and particularly not only as I said earlier, globally, but nationally. We absolutely felt that he fit all of the criteria that we were looking for in a new leader. So just as UMCES, you know, stretches across Maryland from the Eastern Shore to the Appalachians, so does his experience stretch across a broad range of expertise, and they include things like river restoration, coastal wetland sustainability, flood control, restoration of aquatic systems, sediment management, and estuarine systems. Peter brought with him a vision, I mentioned it earlier, for the future of UMCES, which we always want in a new leader. He sees UMCES as a leading research center that seeks to help manage the world's environmental resources and address the world's environmental challenges, these grand challenges. And I really like the sound of that. So he's only a year into his tenure, but his energy is already showing, his impact is already being felt, and we're very, very excited about the kind of leadership that he can bring and taking UMCES, as we always like to say, to the next level, building on what Dawn did for a lot of years and people before Dawn and all the lab directors that are here and all the faculty and staff and students that have been part of it. It is a team effort, but I have to tell you, leadership does matter. And we're very, very proud of the leadership that we have brought forth in the form of Dr. Peter Goodwin. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Peter Goodwin, the president of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences.
Well, thank you, Chancellor, for those kind words. And good morning, distinguished guests, UMCES colleagues, friends from agencies and sister institutions. And I want to just extend a particular thanks to the external panelists which we have today. These will be introduced as the panels come forward, but they are eminent scientists who have built some of the most impressive environmental science research enterprises in the world. So we really appreciate them taking the time to be with us today. As the Chancellor mentioned, I took over an institution that was in incredibly strong shape from Dr. Bosch in the front. We know our research expenditures per tenure track faculty is as good as it is in the field in the United States. And we're not going to do anything in our planning that jeopardizes that incredible productivity. But the challenge that the Chancellor and the Regents gave to me when I first took the position is you have this incredible institution with incredible faculty that are publishing in science and nature. What can be done collectively as an institution across the university system of Maryland, and most importantly with others, to maximize the impact of our research to help resolve some of the most pressing environmental challenges for both the state of Maryland and the world. And then further, how we might extend that and export brand Maryland. So I know we have many people joining us from around the world, so I wanted to spend a few minutes explaining who we are in UMCES. To talk a little about our strengths, and you'll notice also we have gaps. If we're going to make a dent in these major environmental issues, we cannot do it alone. And then I'd like to finish with some of the thinking of our faculty over the last few months about where we might go in terms of preliminary priorities. And our hope is, in this workshop today, is to try and identify some of these large research questions that not only UMCES will coalesce around, but many of our colleagues and friends. So this UMCES is truly, I think, not just unique within the state of Maryland, but I think also in the United States. We were founded in 1925 by state statute to be an institution that provides the predictive ecology to inform the state of Maryland about the improvement and preservation of the physical environment through research, through public service, and through education. And we take those three missions very seriously. We're located just outside Washington, D.C. This is a map showing the state of Maryland. And in the highlight there, you'll see the jewel in the crown for the state of Maryland. Chesapeake Bay, the largest estuary in North America, is an integral part of Maryland's culture, its fisheries, its recreation. And this has been recognized for well over a century. So to address this over those 100 years, UMCES has expanded from its first center at the Chesapeake Biological Lab in 1925 to the Appalachian Lab that focuses primarily on watershed sciences. Going around the state here, the Maryland Sea Grant is part of our responsibility, located at College Park, the University of Maryland College Park being the flagship university of the system. We're located at Horn Point Laboratory, which used to be the DuPont Summer Residence, a wonderful campus on the Eastern Shore, and here in IMET, in the inner city of Baltimore. In addition to that, we run a research vessel, the Rachel Carson that you can see in the image. And I wanted just to say a little about our directors, because it says a lot about this as an institution. Eric Davidson, as well as being a world-class scientist in the Appalachian Lab, was elected by 60,000 of his closest friends to be the current president of the American Geophysical Union. Frederica Moser is not only the director of the Maryland Sea Grant Program, but she was also elected to be the president of the National Sea Grant Association. Bill Dennison, who heads the Integration and Application Network. Until I came here, I thought there were two Bill Dennisons. There was the Bill Dennison from Australia, the healthy waterways person, the scorecard person, and then there was Seagrass Bill. And it wasn't until I arrived that they are one and the same person. Tom Miller, who leads the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory, a world expert in blue crabs, but he's also leading a committee currently developing the recommendations for the role of science in the reauthorization of the national fisheries legislation. And I believe, Tom, that's going to be published this week. Mike Roman, director of the Horn Point Laboratory, is a former president of the Oceanography Society. He is also part of the UNESCO International Ocean Commission Committee, looking at, amongst other things, at oxygen levels in the world's oceans. And right here, Russell Hill, as well as serving as the director of IMET, which is a collaboration between the medical school in Maryland and the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and UMCES. He also serves as the current president of the International Marine Biotechnology Association. So the point here is that in our institution, we're not just administrators. Our leaders walk the talk. They are scientists. They understand about science. And as you can see, also the commitment of service to the global scientific community. Also, in our institution, we are not constrained by traditional colleges and departments. And for those of you who are in academia, you know some of the boundaries that that can throw up. Yes, we have geographic challenges to drive from the Appalachian Lab to Horn Point. Will take you several hours, and for those who traveled yesterday over the bridge, it probably took most of the day. So we're not bound by what my wife calls academia. So we have a lot of flexibility to undertake interdisciplinary work in a very unusual fashion. We have many strengths, and in the previous strategic plan, one of the things that came out of that is that we as an institution do genes to ecosystems, mountains to the sea. So we look at scales from the cell right up to large-scale river basins and oceans. Also, as part of this process, we've been going through an institutional assessment. And as part of that, we don't do anything in the normal way. We've been doing a very in-depth survey of what people think. What is it like to work at this institution, with the idea of how can we improve our culture and climate? And this just gives the answer to 3 of the questions. So what you can see here is that we maintain a good balance between fundamental research, discovery, integration, and application. We have a culture of shared governance that I've never seen in an institution that's conducted at the same level. This goes right from our students, through staff, through faculty, through our administrators. And again, this comes out very strongly. And of course, with our fundamental mission, that this is all about environmental stewardship, and particularly service to the state. One of our emerging priorities is entrepreneurship and environmental entrepreneurship. And starting in this center here, there's a program for those students and those faculty who are interested in entrepreneurship, starting companies, looking at new technologies. There is now a mechanism to both learn how this is conducted and resources for spin-off companies and technologies. And unfortunately, we lost Carol Radcliffe just 2 weeks ago, who had been one of the main funders that had started this innovative program. And when I started this talk, I tried to highlight the really big research that's going on. And what I realized in 20 minutes, I wasn't going to get close. So I thought I would just pick on one of our faculty members as an example of this understanding that it's service, it's fundamental research, and service not just to the state, but to our institutions. So Mike Wahlberg here, of course, very famous fisheries scientist. He has just completed, working with the Department of Natural Resources, the Maryland oyster stock assessment. He also serves in his spare time as the president of our faculty senate, just showing this deep engagement and commitment to the institution. Also, the graduate programs that are offered here is truly a unique experience, and this is part of our priority. What should we be doing? So again, part of what the Chancellor calls systemness is how do we work across institutions to offer a very unique education. So 6 of the 12 institutions contribute to what's called the UMCES program. And what it really impressed me coming here is Larry Sanford, Tom Miller, Ken Painter have taken a very careful look at how do you teach interdisciplinary environmental science. And I must admit, earlier in my career, I was a great critic of that. I spent 2 years taking coursework to do a very narrow area. How can you do this interdisciplinary research and give both the breadth and the depth? And I think what's been developed here is truly innovative. So what's the goal here? Collectively, across the system, we want this to be one of the top 3 ranked environmental science graduate programs in the country. But the education goes beyond that. How do we teach? How do we ensure the pipeline? And Kat Stalinsky here, receiving the President's Award for Application of Science, just epitomizes that commitment. The other thing that I would like to acknowledge that really impressed me, when you first come to UMCES, you look at the facilities, you look at the resources, and it's incredible. And this doesn't happen through faculty or leadership. You can't run an effective organization without outstanding staff. And the way our staff work across our 6 diverse locations is truly remarkable. We have a problem, and equipment goes out, a building is substandard. It's not just, let's fix it. It's how can we fix it in a way that's going to save the institution money, but also how do we do it in the most green possible way? And so this team approach is quite remarkable. This just shows the 4 awards that have been given to UMCES during 2018 for the greening of our facilities. We are huge energy users, putting in solar panels. So I'd really like to commend the staff that allows us to do our jobs in such a successful way. And the last point about who we are, and I think this surprised us all, we asked faculty and researchers, who are you actively collaborating with outside the United States? And for a small institution, the response was remarkable. We have an incomplete list here of 112 active collaborations around the world. And it's incomplete because there isn't a dot here for the Arctic Ocean. And that was because our research that are working up there were in the field when the survey was done. So what's been guiding our thinking as an institution about these really big challenges? Of course, right now, particularly with the publications that have come out just in the last 2 weeks, climate change is driving a lot. And of course, this is important. The oceans are warming much faster than we believed. We're seeing that the ice sheets are much more dynamic than we believed. New technologies are coming out and giving us this information. We're seeing increasing variability in the weather, the driving of our environment. But that's not alone. Of course, for those of you on Wednesday that saw this report, we thought we had peaked with carbon dioxide emissions on the globe. 2015, 2016, the levels were plateauing. 2017, it spiked again. So climate change is important, but it's not the only thing that we need to be concerned about. The great paper 10 years ago, Stationarity is Dead. What we realize is that these systems we're working in are incredibly dynamic. There's greater variability we need to deal with. Extremes are becoming more extreme. Sea level rise is globally an issue. More than 500 million people are at risk in coastal areas. And within those vulnerable areas, there's trillions of dollars of infrastructure at risk. But also there's invasive species, the ballast water issue, there's population growth. Just between the time of this lecture and 2050, the increase in the world's population using the world water use in those countries will require 750 cubic miles of water per year beyond what we have right now. And many of these areas are in areas of water scarcity. There's changing land use. And so the National Academies in 2014, looking just at the state of California, said in this way that this is a wicked problem. We're working in these dynamic systems. The days of prescriptive solutions where we would come up with an engineering fix or a management fix and we forget about it are gone. These systems are changing so fast, we need to be able to monitor, to understand, and have adaptive solutions which will ensure the outcomes we want are in fact achieved. And to give you one little example of how important this is, if you look at that blue dot, everything in that blue dot is what we know about the topic. So what we know we don't know is captured by the perimeter of that circle. Over time, as we learn more about the system, you can see what happens to the perimeter of the circle. There's much more uncertainty. And so in one very simple example, tidal wetland restoration, in the 1990s, we developed tools. We have one of the developers of Delft 3D at the time, and we got really, really good at being able to predict in diminishing sediment supplies how tidal marshes evolve and change over time. And we thought we had the problem fixed. We knew how to restore at least the physical functioning of those marshes. In the 2000s, the biologists got much more involved, and these problems became much, much more complex. This is the broad view, the simple conceptual model for how tidal marshes function. And beneath this, there's conceptual models in each of those boxes. Mercury, for example. So how do we tease out, in an era of complexity, from a management perspective, what's important? How do we structure the science questions for the problem in place? And of course, with our tidal wetland restoration, the latest thing is this could potentially be a great way for carbon sequestration. So how are we going to get there? As everyone's aware, we're in this era of big data. And to quote Alan Bletecki, who was the director of the Office of Cyber Infrastructure at NSF, science and scholarship are team sports. So this isn't to diminish the major contributions of individual scientists. But if we're going to address these big issues, we need to be working much more of a team. And we need to be thinking much more about models, because models encapsulate what we know today. And models are never completed. They're only abandoned because there's the next model coming on board. But it's a way of structuring knowledge. But not only that, for those of you who haven't seen some of Scott Miner, who's one of the great philosophers in the development of Silicon Valley, some of his webinars that you can pick up, he identifies that tools change how we interact with one another, how we behave as an agency, as researchers, and therefore how we think. So building on our strengths, here interdisciplinary research can be wonderfully edifying, it can be fun. That's a quote from 2005. It's where the breakthroughs are occurring. But the update of that 10 years later began to identify just how difficult that is within the environmental or the academic setting. So in this workshop, I would encourage you to quote Kenny Rose, who's in the audience here, how can we think big? And as an example, Tim Killeen, when he was thinking about the SEAS program at NSF, would start the big thinking about that perhaps the ultimate challenge is maintaining and improving the quality of life for the nation within a healthy Earth system. But we're not doing this alone. There's some guidance documents out there. The NSF 10 Big Ideas. Just 2 issues there, convergence, how you bring together disparate scientific disciplines for breakthroughs. Another of these big 10 ideas is the ideas for the rules of life. Again, we have geneticists, ecologists working on these issues. And in the bottom right-hand corner, Bill Cooper, who's with us today, started the initiative to look at what are the grand challenges in environmental engineering, and that report's going to be released next Wednesday. So in summary, where we are right now, this tries to encapsulate some of the thinking of where we are and in the document that's in front of you. We know we have to grow and build on fundamental research. In the blue are the 6 areas which have come out. Inclusion and diversity that the Chancellor mentioned, priority for University of System of Maryland. As we're here, we've made no progress in the environmental sciences in 40 years. Entrepreneurship, the working environment and culture. We believe we can be a world leader in this thinking. Typically, when you get a group of scientists together and you're doing groupthink, the tendency is you get drawn back to the conventional knowledge where you are today. The young woman sitting in the corner with a brilliant idea would immediately get shot down, or the young scientist. How do we create the environment where these next big ideas can be fostered and grown? The service to Maryland, that's where we are, that's where we started. How can we enhance that? So there's going to be a panel discussion. And currently, our lab directors and faculty from each of the labs tried to look at the priorities which were expressed by faculty when we first started this, and we've grouped them loosely into these 3 topic areas. So the target of today is what are the big ideas where our faculty have expressed interest of working together? What are the kind of questions where we can make a difference? Who do we need to partner with? So thank you for your attention. It's an honor and a privilege to be invited to lead this unique institution. And I really look forward to seeing what's going to come out of this summit today. Thank you for your attention.